As I travel through this pilgrim land, there is a friend who walks with me, who leads me safely through the sinking sand. It is the Christ of Calvary. This would be my prayer, dear Lord, each day to help me do the best I can. For I need thy light to guide me day and night. Blessed Jesus, hold my hand. Blessed Jesus, hold my hand. Yes, I need thee every hour. Through this land, this pilgrim land, by thy saving power, hear my plea, my feeble plea. Lord, dear Lord, look down on me. When I kneel in prayer, blessed Jesus, hold my hand. When I wander through the valley, dim toward the setting of the sun, lead me safely to a land of rest, till I a crown of life have won. I have put my faith in thee, dear Lord, that I may reach the golden strand. There's no other friend on whom I can depend. Blessed Jesus, hold my hand. Blessed Jesus, hold my hand. Yes, I need thee every hour. Through this land, this pilgrim land, by thy saving power, hear my plea, my feeble plea. Lord, dear Lord, look down on me. When I kneel in prayer, blessed Jesus, hold my hand. Blessed Jesus, hold my hand. Yes, I need thee every hour. Through this land, this pilgrim land, by thy saving power, hear my plea, my feeble plea. Lord, dear Lord, look down on me. When I kneel in prayer, blessed Jesus, hold my hand. Please see things.
Good morning. Good morning. It is great, as always, to be here with you on a Sunday morning, worshiping God together. If you are visiting with us, I hope that you know that you are our honored guests, and we are so excited that you chose to be here worshiping with us here at Highlands today. So last 2 weekends ago, our student ministry traveled up to Alabama for the Gulf Youth Experience. We've had some changes in our programming over the last year, and we were able to take 35 people all the way up to Alabama to be a part of that conference. And it truly was a great weekend. Mia, as many of you saw last week, Mia was baptized during that conference, and we just saw a lot of growth and some really cool things happen. And so I just wanted to say thank you for all of you who have supported that effort in prayer, have supported with scholarships, all of you who helped with our barbecue fundraiser and helping us get our students on that trip. This is an exciting time in our student ministry. You can look up here at the front on Sunday mornings and see that this is a ministry that is growing. It is really exciting to see, to me, and encouraging just to see our students up here engaging with us in worship on Sunday mornings. So thank you. Thank you for your prayers, and thank you for your support. It's been a great year, and we're looking forward to an even more exciting year in 2020. Before we start, let's go ahead and say a prayer together. God, I just pray that this morning that you will speak to us through your word. And God, I just pray that you will help us, myself, and everyone in here to just step out of your way and allow us and help us to see what it is that you need us to see this morning. Help us to take these things, these messages from your word, and to apply them to our hearts and to our lives in a way that empowers us and enables us and motivates us to leave here prepared to do your work, the work of your kingdom, and spreading your name and your glory throughout Lakeland and throughout the world. God, we love you and we praise you. In your Son's holy name, amen. So if you will, turn in your Bibles or on your phones to Exodus chapter 17. We're going to be in Exodus chapter 17 this morning. And before we start reading, what we see here is that Moses and Joshua are leading the Israelites through the wilderness. And Israel is attacked by the Amalekites. Now, this is a pretty normal thing, right? The Israelites are on their way. They are navigating through the wilderness, heading towards the Promised Land. And as they're going through the wilderness, they're going to step into the territories of some other nations. And as they cross different boundaries and different territories, some nations take that better than others. Some choose to let them pass, but in that time, territory mattered. And so as the Israelites cross different territories, they are met by different foes. We see it with Jericho and with Canaan and others, that war is just inevitable when you have that many people traveling through the land. And something that's happening here is Moses, who is the leader of the Israelites, he is beginning to transition that leadership over to Joshua. And so we see that a decision has been made. Joshua is going to be the next leader of the Israelites. And Moses, as he can, is starting to give more and more of the responsibility over to Joshua. And really, as we look through Exodus, we see a pretty intentional transition of leadership from Moses to Joshua. So let's begin reading here in verse 8. Exodus 17, starting in verse 8, it says, "At Rephidim, Amalek came and fought against Israel. Moses said to Joshua, 'Select some men for us to go and fight against Amalek, for tomorrow I will stand on the hilltop with God's staff in my hand.'" So here we see that roles are kind of decided. Moses tells Joshua that Joshua is going to be the one to lead the Israelites in battle. Joshua is going to be at the front as the warrior, as the leader, as the general, and he is going to physically lead the Israelites in battle. Moses, on the other hand, it would appear, is kind of choosing to take a back seat. He's choosing to allow Joshua to lead. We have to remember, Moses is older at this point. He's not as physically capable as he once was. And so rather than join his people in battle, he decides to go up on the hilltop overlooking the valley where the battle is going to take place and to watch. And it would seem that this is Moses really empowering Joshua to take leadership here. It would seem that this is Moses acknowledging his inability, his lack of an ability to fight in battle, and kind of getting out of the way. And it would seem that Moses really doesn't have much of a role to play in this battle. But if we continue reading in verse 11, in verse 11, it says, "While Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed. But whenever he put his hand down, Amalek prevailed." So the battle has started. Moses is on the hilltop overwatching the battle. And something weird happens. Moses figures out pretty quickly that the position of his hands are affecting the battle. Whenever his arms are raised, specifically with God's staff in his hand, whenever his arms are raised, the Israelites start winning. But whenever Moses lowers his arms, all of a sudden the battle turns and doesn't go as well. And as you can imagine, This is a battle that is probably lasting all day. And Moses is standing there with his arms raised. And in that position, eventually you're going to get tired. Moses is older. He's not as healthy or as strong as he once was. But even for me, standing there with my arms high, after a few minutes, I'm going to want to put them down. But then in verses 12 and 13, we see something really unique. It says, when Moses' hands grew heavy, they took a stone and they put it under him, and he sat down on it. Then Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one on one side and one on the other, so that his hands remained steady until the sun went down. So Joshua defeated Amalek and his army with the sword. So Moses is standing there with his arms raised, and he's getting tired, and he can't hold them up anymore. But Aaron and Hur are there, and they step in, and they hold Moses' arms for him so that he can keep them raised throughout the battle. And without that effort, the Israelites would have been lost. But because of this teamwork and because of this sacrifice on the part of Moses and Aaron and Hur, the battle is won. And this is kind of a weird story. It doesn't appear overly significant. It doesn't take up a whole lot of Exodus. But this has always been a story that has been really interesting to me. And as we think about this event, we have to ask ourselves, what does this have to do with us? Well, as I was reading and preparing for this sermon, in one of the commentaries, I found this passage, and I want to read it to you. This is from Richard Foster, and he says this about this story. It says, in the military annals, Joshua was the commander who won the victory that day. He was the person up front and in the thick of the conflict. But you and I know the rest of the story. Back behind the scenes, the battle of intercession was won by Moses and Aaron and Hur. Each role was essential for victory. Joshua needed to lead the charge. Moses was needed to intercede on behalf of the children of Israel. Aaron and Hur were needed to assist Moses as he grew weary. You know, when we first look at the beginning of this story, it appears like Moses isn't really going to play a role in this battle. It seems that he's really saying, hey, Joshua, this is your time. Go, lead, and I'm just going to get out of the way. But very quickly, what develops is an understanding that Moses and Aaron and Hur are going to play a vital role. And it's not the role that you might normally imagine for the leader of thousands, if not millions of people. But it was a vital role nonetheless. This reminds me of a time I've shared parts of this story with you before. But as I've shared before, my brother, Caleb, he passed away. It's been almost 3 years now. This happened while we were at camp. And so my dad and I, we direct a week of camp called Upward Bound, and it's like a leadership training camp. And while we were there, my brother was working there, and he died there at camp. And as you can imagine, that was a very traumatic experience for us, but one of the hardest things that you don't really think about. So my brother died. We went to the hospital. We identified his body, and when we met with the doctors and confirmed that he had passed. And as we're coming back to camp, this realization hits us. You know, we've just been through this awful, horrible thing, but this realization hits us that we're still directing this week of camp. We're still responsible for almost 100 students and teenagers and staff. And now, when we get back to camp, we realize that all of these students have been gathered through this whole ordeal. They've been gathered in the dining hall, just sitting there waiting When everything happened, they were moved to the dining hall. They sat on the floor, and I don't think a lot of information was given to them. They knew something was going on. They knew it wasn't good, but they didn't know what had happened. They didn't know that Caleb was gone. And now the responsibility fell to myself and mainly my dad to share this news and to minister to these students in this moment. And I remember there was a moment right before we walked into that room. You have all these students who were friends of my brother. Some of them were campers, and Caleb was their counselor. They had developed relationships with him throughout that week, and we had to go and explain what had happened. And there was a moment right before we walked in where my dad said, I don't know how we're supposed to do this. We don't even really know what to do in that moment. We're processing it ourselves. It really hasn't hit us yet, and yet we have to go and try to explain it to students and comfort students when we ourselves need to be comforted. And that was really hard, and we prayed together and we walked into that room. And in that moment when we walked in, the lights were off, the students were sitting on the ground, they were singing when we walked in, and my dad walks up to the front, and in a moment that I believe is one of the, probably the strongest I have ever seen him, and probably the most respect I've ever had for my father, he stood before this group of campers and explained what had happened and gave them a message of hope and a message of just the love that God has for us. And for him to be able to do that in that moment takes a strength that is hard to imagine and to understand. But there was something that happened in that room that I noticed, and I actually don't know if anyone else saw this. I have not really shared this before. But while we were standing up in that room in front of the students and my father was explaining this, at some moment I looked over to the corner, and in the back corner of the room, and to this day I don't know who this was. It was dark, I couldn't see her face, but someone, one of our adult female counselors, was in the back corner on her knees with their hands held high, praying in that moment. Just praying. I have no clue who it was. I don't know which of our counselors it was, and to be honest, I've tried to walk through my mind and figure out which counselor I didn't see. I have no clue who it was, but somebody felt the need to intercede on our behalf in that moment because they recognized how difficult that moment was for us. I think we need to recognize that the praying lady in the corner, which is what I've called her for the last 3 years, the praying lady in the corner matters. A lot of times when we think about leadership, when we think about the work of the church, when we think about who we are here at Highlands, a lot of times when we're trying to figure out our role in the work of the kingdom of God, we think of leadership as being up here, as standing up front, as leading a ministry, as serving in some sort of official capacity, as leading a mission trip or whatever that may look like. But the reality is that the person leading the battle is not the only role that matters. The praying lady in the corner matters. And maybe this is an opportunity for you to figure out your role here at Highlands. You see, here at Highlands, there are a lot of things going on. And in fact, sometimes it feels like we've got too many ministries all happening at once. And there is opportunities for everyone to be involved in the work here. But I think sometimes we look at all those opportunities and we go, I can't lead that. I can't teach a class. I can't do this. Where do I fit? We don't feel talented enough. We don't feel gifted enough or recognized enough, and so we just don't know where our role is. Maybe you're not a Joshua. Maybe you're not the one who needs to get out front with your sword and lead the battle, and maybe you're not even a Moses. But maybe your role in this church is as an Aaron or a Hur. If you ask me today to name the people who have played the biggest role in my ministry here, the three names I would give you are not names that you would expect. And in fact, the three names that I would give you as far as people who have allowed me to do my job the most effectively here, there's a lot of names I could give you, but the three that come to my mind right off the bat are not names you would expect. I'm pretty sure they've never even been over to the FLC. I don't know that they've ever even stepped foot in a student ministry class before. But there is one man here that I think of specifically. About 6 months ago, he approached me after a Sunday morning sermon. I think I had just gotten done preaching. And he approached me and he said, "Andrew, how are you doing?" And of course, that's a normal question. I say, "Oh, I'm good, I'm fine." Just the regular answer that we give. He says, "No, Andrew, how are you doing? Are you okay? Are you taking care of yourself? Are you pouring out too much? Are you being filled?" And when he asked those questions, I just got really uncomfortable and kind of put it back because, to be honest, I hadn't been asked that before here. You see, he recognized that someone needed to make sure I was okay. And every other Sunday, at least once or twice a month, he comes to me, and the only time we speak is after Sunday morning services, and he says, "Andrew, are you okay? How are you doing? Are you taking care of yourself?" And that constant reminder that I need to make sure that I'm able to be in a good place so that I can pour into students and pour into people here, that constant reminder has kept me going through a lot of stuff in a way that he'll never understand. There's two ladies that come to mind, and again, they're not someone that teach classes in our ministry. They don't really volunteer in our ministry, but there's two ladies that come to mind that they make sure that they always come to me to know what's going on in our ministry. Not because they're going to volunteer and not because they're going to solve all my problems for me, but purely because they want to be aware so that they can pray. They have prayed over our ministry for the last 2 years. They have prayed over me and our students for the last 2 years, and I promise you that role that they have played is as important as anything I've done in our ministry. There is a role for you to play here, and a lot of times it's not what you might expect. We do a lot of praying in preparation for things. We do a lot of praying at the end of things. So if we're going to go on a trip to Alabama, we'll gather up and we'll pray before, and then we'll go on the trip. And then we'll gather up at the end and we'll pray after, thanking God for safe, successful trip. And that's what we do. We pray a lot in preparation and at the end. But here in Exodus, what we see is that prayer is not just preparation for the battle. Prayer is the battle. It is part of the fight. That intercession on behalf of the people that we care about, or on behalf of what we're doing, or on behalf of our ministers, or on behalf of our students, on behalf of our team in Guatemala, or on behalf of our students at camp, or on behalf of our members on the SOAR trip. That intercession is the battle. There is a role for each and every one of us to play here at Highlands. The other thing I think about when I look at this story is I think that this story gives us a really good picture of how the church was designed to work. What would it look like if we at Highlands rushed to the side of those hurting amongst us? What would it look like if we rushed to the side of those who are growing weary in the midst of battles? Something I notice here, Aaron and Hur, they rushed to Moses' side. As far as we know, Moses never explained exactly what was going on. We don't see a moment of Moses going, "Hey guys, I need some help here." And to be honest, this probably looked kind of weird. Moses is this older guy just standing on the mountaintop, just touchdown, over the battle. That was probably kind of odd. I'm pretty sure that that's not a normal position in a military plan. Aaron and Hur, they don't even question it. They don't go up to Moses and say, hey, is this really necessary? Is this what we need to be doing? They don't critique his form. They don't tell him to, lower his arms a little bit to get. They don't do that. They don't say, hey, Moses, you really should have been prepared for this. You should have worked out a little more. They just rush to his side and they do what they can in the moment to help him get through. So what would it look like if we rush to those who are hurting, if we rush to those who are in the midst of battle, not to judge, not to tell them how to fix their lives, but simply to hold up their arms and help them to get through? In the Dominican, and I think I've shared this before, but in the Dominican we had a missionary who talked all the time about swimming to pain. And this is an idea that we all understand. You get in the pool, you're hanging out, you're having a good time, and you're hanging out in the shallow end, and you see some kid or somebody is drowning in the deep end. And what you don't do is get out of the pool. What you don't do is swim away from the drowning person. What you do is you swim to the drowning person and you help them out of the pool. But a lot of times when it comes to people who are in pain or in the midst of spiritual battles in their lives, in the church, we are the exact opposite. When we see someone hurting, what we tend to do is swim away. We create healthy distance that's healthy for us, but not so healthy for them. Because we are uncomfortable with other people hurting. We can be uncomfortable with someone else hurting because a lot of times what that does is it reveals our own hurts in us. We can be uncomfortable with imperfect people because that reveals the imperfectness in us. So my question to you this morning is, whose arms can you hold up this week? Right now, you are surrounded by people who all are living life just like you are, and more than likely someone in your row or in your section or around you right now is hurting or in the midst of a serious spiritual battle in their lives, and they don't need you to come in and fix it for them. They don't need you to come in and tell them how to change it or how they should have been more prepared. What they need is for you to step beside them and to grab hold of their arm and hold them up through this. Who around you right now, whose arms can you hold up this week? Because I believe that just like in Genesis, when God looks at Adam and says, man, it is really not good for that guy to be alone. I need to give him somebody. It is not good for man to walk through this life alone, and so he gave Adam Eve. And I believe that Jesus, here on this earth, surrounded by his disciples, looks at the community that they had and looks at the spiritual connection that they have, and he goes, our Christians, they can't do this alone. They need the church. We've got to give them somebody. We were not meant or designed or intended to walk through this life alone. Every aspect of our life was intended to be done in spiritual community, directed and connected by God. Whose arms can you hold up this week? The last thing I think about when I look at this story is that this story should really change the way that we view the battles in our own lives. See, when I face battles in my life, I tend to want to play the role of Joshua. When things get hard, when things in my life don't go the way they're supposed to or the way I think they're supposed to, when I don't know what's going to happen, when I'm scared, what I tend to do is I put on my armor and I pull up my sword and I jump to the front of the battle and I just try to win it by myself. And I take whatever it is on without any concern about what role I actually need to be playing in this or who's playing it with me. And I just go after it. But this story reminds us that our God is the commander of armies of angels. He is the one who silences the storms, and He is the miracle worker and not us. See, Joshua played a role in this battle, but it actually wasn't the important role, because you know what? It doesn't matter how hard Joshua fought in that moment. His strength, his courage was not going to determine the battle that day. The victory was decided by the God who commands armies. The victory of the Israelites was decided by the God who had chosen them as His people, not by Joshua, not by his strength, and not by his sword. When we face storms in our lives, our first instinct is to fight. We try to circle the wagons and protect ourselves from further attacks. We isolate ourselves. But in reality, times of trouble are when we need to make ourselves the most vulnerable. Is when we take our armor off and we allow God to be our commander and our Father. Prayer, rather than flight, should be our first survival instinct. The only way to win the war is through surrender. It's actually not through fighting at all. But it's rather through surrendering to our God, who is our commander and our Father and our Savior. Prayer isn't just about the preparation for battle. Prayer is not just thanks for winning the battle. Prayer is the war. I'm reminded of Psalm chapter 46 in verse 10. David is talking about all these awful things that are happening in his life, all these things that are scaring him, and yet God says, stop your fighting and know that I am God, exalted among the nations, exalted on the earth. And I need to hear that so often. Because when things go wrong in my life, I pull out my sword and I strap on my armor and I go after it like I have any power to do anything about it in the first place. But in those moments, surrender to the God who knows all, is over all. That's what matters most. So this morning, are you willing to surrender to Him? You might feel overwhelmed, but the good news is that the war has already been won. So this morning, I think about two groups of people here this morning. I think about those of you who are Christians, who have given your life to Christ, but man, it is so easy. It is so easy to forget what God has done for us and start imagining ourselves as being capable of handling way more than we actually are. This morning, maybe you're in the midst of a battle. Maybe you're in the midst of a storm, and you've been trying to fight this out on your own. And what I want you to hear this morning is that you are not alone in this. And the reality is, whatever you're going through in life, you're actually, more than likely, you're actually not able to handle it. You know, we say this a lot. We say, you've got this, or you can do this, or you can handle this. You actually can't. I can't either. And that's what's beautiful about it, is that we don't have to. God is there as our commander to lead us in this battle, and He has given us the church to surround us and uphold us and walk beside us. And this morning, if you need that, we would love to just know that you're hurting, to just know that you're struggling, so that we can surround you and intercede on your behalf, so that we can hold up your arms. Because listen, I will hold up your arms today, because here soon, at some point in my life, I'm going to need you to hold up mine. But this morning, maybe you're not a Christian and you haven't entered into God's family. And if that's the case, I pray that you know that you have a God who is bigger than anything you've ever faced in your life, who is bigger than any struggle you've ever had. You have a God who knows you and loves you and wants desperately to have a relationship with you. And if that's you this morning, we would love to show you through His Word the plan that God has laid out specifically for your life. Whatever your needs may be this morning, we ask that you come as we stand and as we sing.
To